recorded.
It used to be on Netflix.
It is on Netflix? I'm glad that's been recorded now too. Thanks, Stuart. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I am really glad that you're here. I know that we're in the weird post-lunch spot, but we're going to try and power through. So let me start with a quick introduction. My name is Kathryn Grayson Nanz. I'm a UI designer and front-end developer working for Herman International. You can find me on Twitter at Kathryn Grayson, clearly made before I got married. And I've tweeted a couple links there that I might reference here. If you want a little bit more information on imposter syndrome, that's a great place to start. So speaking at conferences is something that I have come to really enjoy doing, but it was not always that way. My first conference was a few years ago. It was the Email Design Conference up in Boston. And going there, I was absolutely just paralyzingly nervous. I could not believe they had chosen me. I thought it was a mistake. I had thrown my hat in, like, yeah, we'll see if they want me to come. Yeah, right. And then they did, and I didn't know what to do. I had practiced and practiced, but still felt so shaky. And a lot of that for me was a hang-up about my age. I felt really young. I felt so sure that I was going to stand up there and people were going to look and be like, who the hell is this millennial? And where does she get off trying to tell us how to do our jobs, right? I also have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I don't have a computer sciences degree. And so to get up at any kind of tech conference and speak with authority was something that I found really, really difficult. And honestly, something that I still struggle with. And with all of those things rushing through my head, I got up on that stage and I absolutely blew through that talk. I spoke so quickly, I skipped whole sections. It was supposed to be about 30 minutes long, and I think it was like 20. A guy had to come on and be like, looks like we have a little extra time between talks, so you guys go grab a cup of coffee. Like, I was mortified. But I was also very glad that it was over. I was so glad to have done it, and it felt like a huge accomplishment in the moment. That was until the conference team released the videos a couple weeks later. I must have watched mine 1,000 times, just over and over and over again. And every single time I would go through and critique the littlest things, how I walked or how I gestured, which I do a lot, as you get to see, how I had done my hair and what I had worn, and like nothing was right. More than anything, I just wished that I had a chance to go back and try it again and to fix all these stupid little mistakes that I had made, because I was so embarrassed. Even though I had friends and family who knew I had spoken here and who had asked if they could see the video when it was released, I could not bring myself to show it to anyone. I made up the dumbest excuses. Because I was so sure that if they watched it, it would be like this terrible truth revealed. You know, like they had seen me posting about this conference, but they'd see it and go like, all right, so she did speak at the conference, but she did it so poorly that it really doesn't even count. Like, And the next year, I applied for another conference because I am a glutton for punishment. And I was accepted. And this time, I was not going to do the same thing. I was sure. I sat down with a notebook and a pen and a beer, and I watched that old video with the intent of writing down every single mistake that I made so that when I prepared for this next talk, I would not do them again. And you know what I found? That first time, it really was not so bad. It was all right. Like, yes, it had not gone according to plan. Yes, I had spoken too quickly, and I did write that down in my notebook. But in general, this thing that I thought was this massive train wreck wasn't. My major points came across, the audience was engaged, people laughed at my terrible jokes, but I hadn't seen any of that the first time because all I could focus on were the things that weren't exactly perfect. This, at its heart, is so much of what imposter syndrome is. It is that constant nagging voice in the back of your head telling you that you are not good enough to do what you're doing, and that if you do happen to accomplish it, then it was only luck or chance or outside intervention, never anything that you yourself had done. Doctors Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes were the first to give this a name. They originally called it imposter phenomenon, and it was in their 1978 paper for Psychotherapy Theory, Research, and Practice. Originally, this was defined to refer to high-performing but inwardly anxious women, although since then the definition has been expanded, and we know that it can apply to anyone. They also defined these steps in the imposter syndrome cycle, and if you're anything like me, they might look pretty familiar. They begin when you start a new project, and are immediately followed by these feelings of anxiety, of self-doubt, of worry, like, why did this project get assigned to me? Why am I on this? This was a mistake. I shouldn't have been included in this, and I can't do it, and now I'm screwed. We tend to react to this kind of feeling in one of two major ways. We will either over-prepare, just throw ourselves into it 110%, read every single thing that we can, set aggressive deadlines, become as much experts as we possibly can in the timeline that we have. Or we might do almost exactly the opposite. We might ignore it and procrastinate, find 1,000 other little things that we suddenly have to do that are very important, in the hopes that if we can just ignore this thing long enough that it might just go away and not be our problem anymore. This rarely works, I can tell you from experience. But one way or another, the deadline will come, the project will end, and when it does, we will ignore any positive feedback that we may have received, and instead choose to focus only on the negative. And like I did with my stupid conference talk, we will blow those out of proportion. We will mull over them, we'll think through it. How could we have done this differently? What were we thinking? And this leads to this feeling of depression, of anxiety, feeling like a fake or a fraud, like you really snuck your way in somewhere that you don't belong. And these feelings continue right up until we start that next project, and then the whole cycle begins again. And every time we go through this cycle, it gets a little bit stronger, and it gets a little harder to break out of because it becomes a pattern for us mentally. So that when that project begins, it's almost like a knee-jerk thought, like, this was a mistake. I can't do this. What were they thinking? The more involved I have become in tech and in the development scene especially, the more I feel that this is a deeply relevant topic for all of us. And honestly, I don't think it's too hard to see why our industry, why tech, is disproportionately affected by this. We work in a field that is constantly evolving and changing. Things that were standard 5 years ago are laughably outdated today, and things that we think are surely the answer now will be proven to have just been fads in another 5 years. Whole languages, frameworks, operating systems are going to turn over the course of our career. We're constantly in a state of learning new things and discarding the old and judging what's the right thing to go with. Not to mention, we work in a field that is surprisingly difficult to explain to someone who does not work in that field. If you happen to have a partner or a friend who is not terribly techie and you've tried to explain a difficulty at work, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get that blank look, the smile and nod, and all of that kind of stuff absolutely has an impact on us. It has an impact on our day-to-day morale, on our feelings of burnout over several years, and absolutely on our feelings of isolation and of imposter syndrome. So often, we are also adding to this problem by selling ourselves short, hung up on this vision that we have in our head of what the perfect developer is supposed to look like, and that's never very realistic. We have this image of someone who is immediately an expert at every single thing they pick up, always on the cutting edge, always using the newest thing, answering every unresolved question on Stack Overflow, and somehow they are able to do this without ever asking for help or having to Google abusive code. So, of course, it feels like we are falling short when this incredibly unrealistic benchmark is what we are measuring ourselves against. But if you want to know the truth, we are all just flying by the seat of our pants here a little bit, making this stuff up as we go. And I can absolutely guarantee you that we all Google things. I promise. In Neil Gaiman's famous Make Good Art commencement address at the University of the Arts, he spoke really openly and candidly about his own struggles with imposter syndrome, which is something that I think is really incredible when you consider what an accomplished author Neil Gaiman is. Like, award-winning, written tons of books, and even he still fights with this feeling of not being good enough. The whole talk is well worth a listen. It's one of those things that I linked in my Twitter, so highly encourage you to go back. But my favorite part from it goes mostly like this. He says, I got out into the world and I coded. And I became a better coder the more I coded, and I coded some more. And no one ever seemed to mind that I was just making it up as I went along. They just saw what I coded and they paid for it, or they didn't. And often they commissioned me to code something else for them. Okay, so yes, I took a couple liberties with this quote in that famous author Neil Gaiman did not say code, he said write. But isn't it still perfectly applicable? I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I have been sitting at my desk feeling like I am just making it up as I go along, just faking it till I make it. But that leads me to ask, when will you have made it? What even qualifies as making it? Does that first website you built count? The one that was entirely in tables? What about all the ones we did that weren't responsive or mobile friendly, or does all that junk count? The stuff that we won't even put up on our portfolios anymore? Or what about the stuff that you wrote last week where that JavaScript technically worked, but you really just grabbed it from somewhere else and you're not really sure how, and it's not broken, but it's also just kind of magic? Does that count? Well, folks, have I got some excellent news for you today, because it all counts. Every single thing. The very first thing that you coded is the thing that made you a developer. And every single thing past that has just made you a better, faster, more knowledgeable developer. There is no hard and fast threshold. Even those of us that come from a background with formal computer sciences degrees are still adapting, still learning things. We are all in this together, holding out our hands to the person next to us, pulling them up, sharing knowledge and experience and tips and tricks and gripes, lots of gripes, and successes. All this because we are still in the process of creating and shaping the internet as we know it. It is still so young. On August 6th, 1991, the World Wide Web first became publicly accessible, making it this year the same age as I am, also born 1991. The World Wide Web and I will both be 27 this year, which you have to agree is really not that old, right? So really, how much of an expert could any of us be in a field that simply did not exist 27 years ago and has not stopped changing for a moment since then? A couple of years ago, I attended an event apart where Jeffrey Zeldman pointed out that we are still in the first 10,000 days of the web. It's been a couple of years, and that is still true, people. That's how new this all still is. We've gotten used to it, we've brought it into our lives in amazing ways, but the internet is still just a baby. And we are shaping the future of what this industry is going to look like. Every day we come in and make decisions and set standards, even if we don't think that we're doing it. And that impacts what this is going to look like years and years, maybe generations from now. This is such an amazing privilege. It means it is such a cool time to be a web developer, but it also means this is incredibly touch and go. The reality is, most of us are going to fall somewhere in the middle of a spectrum that stretches all the way from total novice to total expert, and that's kind of okay. In fact, that's kind of how it's supposed to be. Wouldn't you be really bored working in a field where you knew everything there was to know already? And there was no room at all for growth or advancement? You were just stuck, done? I would hate that. Because to me at least, the fun is in the challenge, in pushing through struggles and finding new answers and discovering new solutions. That feeling of accomplishment when you get something to work and you do it like 5 times just to make sure that it really worked. It's wonderful. It's achievement. It's growth. It feels good. We are all entering this spectrum at different ages, with different backgrounds and different work experiences that have shaped us, and that shapes our work. It makes it better and more diverse. It is so important for us to honor where we are in our career journey as the strength that it is, rather than, as we so often do, thinking of it as a weakness that is holding us back. Because really, that is the worst part of imposter syndrome. It's not just how it makes us feel, but it's how it holds us back. It stopped you from publishing those blog articles that have been sitting in your drafts forever because you're just not sure that you're really enough of an expert on anything to publish. And it pulled you back from joining that volunteer group and being a dev mentor because you don't know enough to answer anybody's questions. You've only been doing this a few years. And it held you back from applying to speak at maybe this conference. Because what could you have to contribute anyway, right? Wrong. Absolutely wrong. That voice in your head telling you those things, it is lying to you. You are qualified. You have unique experiences that are worth sharing, and you deserve to lean in and take up space and make your presence known in this community. You are a part of this, and you are contributing to the future of development just by being here, just by doing your job every day. So, here's the thing about imposter syndrome. Its strength comes from your isolation. Because if you're not talking to other people about your experiences or your struggles or what you're feeling with this, there's no reason you would ever assume that anyone else might be feeling the same way that you are. It's just not something that's terribly natural for us to assume. Imposter syndrome, on the other hand, is incredibly natural. But we don't know because it requires that bit of vulnerability and courage to open up to other people. It feels like a risk. There's this fear that if we do that and say, hey, I'm really struggling, I don't know if I can really handle this, I feel this way about it, the other person will just not get it, right? That we'll get back something like, oh, that sounds hard, but I've never felt that, so good luck. And then you're just stuck. And not only do you not get the validation that you need, but you've also kind of outed yourself as the imposter, which is the last thing that we want to do. So we don't. We put our heads down and we keep our mouths shut, and that kind of behavior is what allows that cycle to continue unbroken. But the truth is that if we did take that leap and open up and talk about this, we would know just how many other people really are all going through this all at once. I've been very lucky in that I've had the opportunity to give this specific talk a couple times now. And every single time, I am amazed and moved by the people that will come up and want to tell me stories about what they're going through at work, or what they've experienced, or why this hit home so much for them. It blew me away the first time, honestly. It made me a little uncomfortable. But now, it's just incredible that we can make these connections and that it really is just insanely, incredibly common. So I grabbed a couple things. I've typed up things that people have said to me or comments folks have left on blogs that I've written about this, and I want to share them in the hopes that maybe one or two of them will hit home for you. And it'll kind of reinforce that, like, no, it's really not just me. I've had that exact experience. Chris said, I also fight the feeling sometimes that I'm faking it, that the smart people around me will find out I don't belong, and my next code review will end with something like, listen, man, it was a good run, but hey, Uber drivers make good money. This one, that code review bit hit home for me. There's nothing more terrifying than that moment when you add other reviewers on your pull request and know that they're going to look through your code line by line and leave comments everywhere you've messed up. And you know it's good, you know it needs to happen because you wouldn't want to merge it in if it sucks, and you need to grow. It makes you better, but also, God, the worst. That for me is when I feel the imposter syndrome most strongly. Jim said, although I tried to learn quickly, I still felt behind everyone else. I never had a bad review, nor was criticized for my code, but I just thought I should know more because of my advanced age. I'm in my mid-40s now, but that feels like 100 in dev years. This one really surprised me because I was expecting a little bit of kind of insecurity or imposter syndrome feelings from folks that were younger, that were feeling, new or inexperienced or overwhelmed. But I really wasn't expecting it from folks that were later in their career. But what I found was that they struggle, in fact, with a lot of the same things, with not knowing which resource is right or what they should be learning next, Angular or React or any number of other crazy frameworks out there. Is this right? Is that right? Should I adopt CSS Grid? Should I not? Are we doing Flexbox now? Or am I still floating things? They feel just as overwhelmed. And what they learned in school might not actually apply much anymore. High-level theory, absolutely, but they might not be using the same languages, or the languages might have changed and evolved so much since they got that degree that they feel just as much a newcomer as an actual newcomer might. So I guess the point, there's no magic year you will hit in your career, like I have been a dev 15 years and suddenly I am entirely qualified. That feeling's not there, even though I thought it would be. And the best and really only thing we can do is to just kind of own where we are and leverage the experience that we have to our benefit. Anna said, I've been at my first real dev job for about a year and a half now, and my first tech lead and mentor left the company recently. He had my back through a lot of tough challenges, and when he left, while pushing me beyond my comfort zone, and when he left, I had the sudden thought, now that he's gone, everyone's gonna see how much I suck. This one I thought was just such a shame, because Anna seemed like she was in such a great position where she had landed this job and she had this really supportive boss with her for this first year. But to her, it felt like nothing she had done in that year and a half counted because she had this help. Like now that he's gone, she's back to square one, which is absolutely the opposite of how it works when we ask for help. So often we don't want to because we're embarrassed, or again, we feel like it undermines what we do accomplish. But the reality is that help only ever builds us up and makes us better. We don't ever regress because that's moved away. It's not a crutch. It builds us up and moves us forward. Finally, this one that I could not help but include, Steve, who says, I just got accepted to speak at a conference, and I'm afraid I'm going to get an oops, we made a mistake email while waiting for the schedule to be published. This one, I think, is probably true of any major accomplishment, at least it has been for me, that I don't feel like it's real until I see it in writing or I can point to proof somewhere. It just feels like a lie, whether that's a promotion or a new job offer, or getting accepted to speak at a conference, or even just being assigned to a big, exciting project. Until that email has gone out, or there's somewhere I can point friends and say, like, look, no, I'm really doing the thing. It feels like we're just making it up. And that's so crazy. It's just this game our mind plays with us. So the more we can do to own what we have accomplished and let that be a reality to us rather than constantly undermining ourselves, the better we will be. The key to breaking this imposter cycle is having more and more conversations and sharing more and more stories like these. Ones where we can call imposter syndrome by its name and talk about it. To be a real nerd here and talk to you about Harry Potter. Because in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Dumbledore encourages Harry to call Voldemort by his name instead of saying he who must not be named. This idea, this trope of the true name, It's actually kind of common, especially in sci-fi and fantasy. But I think it is so common because there really is a grain of truth behind it. When we can accurately name something, it gives us power over that thing. Being able to recognize imposter syndrome in our own lives and name it is the most important part of overcoming it, because that is what gives us the tools to talk about it, and that is what reinforces just how common it is. If this wasn't happening to tons of people, they wouldn't have given it a name. And if everyone is an imposter, then nobody is. But even knowing what it is, it can still be kind of hard to break out of this pattern that we have established over years of going through it over and over. So I've put together this small list of kind of tricks, day-to-day stuff that you can do to help kind of rewire that thought pattern a little bit. And I hope it will kind of break you out of that pattern. The first is to keep a list of all your accomplishments and positive things that people have said about you. I realize this sounds very narcissistic, but I promise you it is not. It does not need to be public. In fact, it probably should not. And it's just there for you. When you're having a bad day, when you're struggling with this, to be able to look at it and say, no, here are the incredible things that I have done recently. Here are the people that value those contributions. Take a break from social media. I know everyone knows social media is just the highlight reel of everyone else's life. They only share the things they want you to see. But it can be so hard to remember when you're scrolling through it. It feels like everyone else is just success, success, success. And all you do is look at it and go, oh, I wish I was doing that. But everyone is stumbling and falling, picking themselves up and trying again. They're just not making Facebook posts about those moments. So if you catch yourself playing that comparison game, that might be a sign that it's time to just take a step back for a little bit. Owning your own accomplishments. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's something that I think is so common, especially when we get a compliment in person. It's so normal for people to kind of dodge it. You know, if someone's like, hey, that looks really good. Half the time what you get back is people going, it was nothing, or I had a bunch of help, or like, it's so rare for us to really own it. And it's okay, it's not rude to do that, for us to practice this art of gracious acceptance, you know? So maybe next time when you find yourself wanting to dodge a compliment, try something instead, like, thank you so much. Me and so-and-so worked together on this, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm so glad that you like it too. Find a mentor or become a mentor yourself. If you're feeling especially ambitious, you could even do both at once. That's not breaking any rules. Having a mentor who will be able to honestly assess your skill set and help you fill in any knowledge gaps that you might have, that is going to make you feel so much more confident, especially in the workplace, knowing that there's someone there that you can kind of rely on and ask any questions to and not feel judged or silly or stupid. On the flip side, being a mentor for someone else is going to reinforce for you how much of this stuff you seriously do already know. And if you happen to get asked a question that you don't know the answer to, honestly, that can be just as productive. The best way to learn is to teach. And it can be so reassuring for your mentee to see that you don't know everything. The few times that's happened to me when I've been pair programming and my boss or someone else has had to go, I don't know, let me look up the details on that. Let me read the spec on that. Like, oh, thank God, you have to look it up too. You don't just know all this? Such a feeling of relief. This one's a real quick and easy win, but you can always take this quiz at amiarealdeveloper.com. I don't want to spoil it too much for you, but you're a real developer. Finally, and by far most importantly, is to push yourself into new situations, even when you don't feel 100% qualified. Take on challenging projects, even when you're not totally sure that you can do it. Don't be afraid to take on these new things and push your boundaries, because it is really the only way to get better. The first time might not be perfect, and that's kind of okay. You'll probably do better than you think, and even if you find yourself completely, totally stuck, there is no shame at all in asking for help. In fact, right now you are surrounded by a community of people that are an amazing resource for doing just that, reaching out and picking someone else's brain and getting a little bit of help. When we push past that uncomfortable feeling and are able to force ourselves into new uncharted territory, that is where the really good stuff happens. That's where new solutions are found and compelling code choices are made. That's where we set standards and push forward. By constantly telling ourselves that we shouldn't or we can't, we are not doing anyone any favors. Not ourselves, not our workplaces, and certainly not the industry as a whole. Get involved, make connections, share these experiences, and immerse yourself in this community because it exists for you. And the more we talk about this like the normal thing that it is, the easier it becomes for us to push through it. And I know this is not as easy as it sounds. I've stood up here, I've given this very concise, like, here are these steps, and here's what it is, and here's what to do. But I know that this isn't easy, and that you're not going to be able to leave here and overnight be like, oh yes, I no longer experience imposter syndrome. Thank goodness I went to that incredibly educational talk. Like, this is a process, and you might have to do it over and over the course of your career. This might not be something you handle once and it's gone forever. New jobs, new projects, all this might trigger these feelings again, and that's normal. But what I can tell you is that when you do push through this, on the other side, there is an absolutely incredible support system just waiting for you. And I would encourage all of you to start working on your presentation submission for Drupal Camp 2019, because I am sure that each and every one of you have an experience that is worth sharing. Thank you guys so much. I know we ended early, and this time that was actually a little bit intentional. Because I wanted to leave a little bit of time for discussion if you wanted to have it. That's something that I found, again, kind of having done this once or twice, that was really beneficial. Because I can talk at you all day, and that's cool. But being able to share times when you felt this way has been more powerful in my experience. If that's not interesting to you, I also won't judge you for ducking out a little early. But I thought I'd just come chill. We could talk. Has there ever been a time when you felt like this was something you struggled with, or were you like, I ended up in the wrong talk today?
No. Yeah, I think you're right that most people at some point in their career have that feeling, whether, and it doesn't matter the industry really, it could be you're a physician or because most fields of professionalism now are ever evolving. It's not just, this is how you do it, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's never going to change, so you can master it, and you can know every single thing. I don't think those jobs really exist anymore. This is how things work now, but 2 years from now, even 2 months from now, it may be completely different. So I think everyone's just trying to stay caught up and stay competitive and stay knowledgeable. And it's the competitiveness, I think, that really gets you into that imposter zone.
Yeah, when you think of your resume just next to everyone else's stack.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. Well, where I work, I've been there 25 years. So I started when there was no email, there was no internet. And so I've evolved the whole time. But then we have the millennials coming in as older people retire. And that feels a little threatening because now all of a sudden you feel like maybe you didn't grow up with an iPad in your hand and computer knowledge or language just, pretty much feeling innate. It's completely different. And so that imposter feeling comes on even stronger at times. That's my experience.
Try to break into the field when you're over the age of 50. And I've just, the last couple of years, I've been trying to learn coding, but I feel like I can't keep up like the millennials because it takes me so much longer to learn the information because, like you said, I didn't grow up with an iPad in my hand or any of that. So I'm still looking for my first position because I just can't get up the courage to actually go out there and say, I can do something, because I know there's so many people out there that could probably do it so much faster and better than I can. So,
I'd say, meanwhile, I am one of those millennials. In my case, I'm 33. So it's fun. I like to call myself like in the transition, because when I was 8, we had the full set of Encyclopedia Britannica, and then when I finished high school, Wikipedia started. So it's kind of like watching the whole thing get built out. But when you mentioned that, I know that can lead to analysis paralysis. I know in my case that has to do with my business. That it's this whole thing of, and that I want to release products, but you get out there, someone else already has a great product, and you're thinking, how will I be competitive with that? I also had a question for you too. How do you think this relates to, like I said, like imposter syndrome? How it might relate to, like what I would call analysis paralysis, the fear of failure?
Right.
Because I do know, funny enough, like one of the things that helped me the most in this regard was having a couple of very major failures. One of them involving a large application going down for 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
Because I screwed up an update that badly, so I had to reconfigure a bunch of stuff. But I didn't get fired apparently. But it's like once you go through that and you survive it, and you're like, okay, it can't get worse than that. How do you think that also might relate to this?
I definitely agree and see some similarities, and I think there's a lot of that, because I kind of work in like software development. There's a lot of like, we can't push until it's perfect, this kind of feeling, or we can't release until it's perfect. And we'll sit and tweak things and endlessly and back and forth, and what are our competitors doing, and what are we doing? To me, one of the things that's really helped both me personally and kind of my company is the reminder that everything is kind of iterable. It's not one and done. So you can push something and it might not be perfect, or it might not be just what you need, but at least then you're out there and you're gaining interest and you're gaining customers and you're gaining users that can give you feedback.
Yeah, I've heard the phrase before of don't let great be the enemy of good.
Yes. That's
Kind of like
something
that.
that I have found very helpful. That's exactly the idea. So like if you wait for it to be perfect, it'll never be out there. And so that does come with a little bit of, I guess, acceptance of failure. Which is horrifying to me, but natural also. That if you put it out there, there could be something that goes wrong. It could be buggy for some users. You could only be able to support a small amount of users, but at least that gets your foot in the door, and that gives you a position to move forward. So.
I think that some of this, you're saying that it affected you, but I noticed that with women, this affects us a lot. This idea that if we could just get a little more educated, we end up being the most educated person in the room with the least experience because we don't feel qualified for a long time. I got into business finally in my 40s. I started the company. It was all women. We all did it together. And before then, I'd watched guys with half read seriously, just to say, you know what, I'm good enough, and start. And I just looked at them and I went, okay, that's how you do it. You say, I'm good enough, I'm going to start. And then pick it up as you go,
I read a really interesting article that said that, and this is average, so obviously not everyone, but most men will apply to a job if they meet 60% of the criteria, whereas women will wait until they meet 80%.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
But that
Women like 80-20 chances of success, whereas guys are very comfortable with 60.
Right, they're risk takers, and some of them will overestimate.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. I'm not saying all men. I'm just saying that. Or all women either. I'm just saying that it's,
Yeah, no. I definitely don't want to get into the place where we're saying everyone else is women.
No, it's not like that. I just noticed that for myself, especially. I had to adopt that idea. Like, let's start. It's good enough. We'll make rolling changes.
Oh yeah. No, and that's part of why when they first identified this, it was identified as a women's issue, imposter syndrome, and it's not. You can talk to people who can tell you for sure, like it's not, but it is very common.
Yeah, there could be some differences in how it's expressed, for sure, but I do think the issue is there because also what can happen with men is men can sometimes also be held to a very high standard.
Yes.
It's like, you should know what you're doing, and there are no exceptions for you. But But it's also then like, if you also get told no often enough, because that's also what can happen with imposter syndrome, is that if you, and if you want to, just because also I teach coding, so I teach both men and women, and I know something I have to be careful for is you can never make the assumption of like, oh, I need to help this person extra, or have sympathy for them, because you're actually, that can actually be more hurtful later on.
Great.
I feel like, you know, to talk about the gender issue, like, I think, you know, boys growing up are really taught or pushed to be confident and assertive and, you know, competitive. And I mean, for me, like, that was always something like I kind of rebelled against. And so it's, I don't know, it's just like, I always like look at other people who are, you know, kind of accepting that norm and acting in accordance with it. And there is kind of the assumption that, yeah, they must know what they're doing.
And if they don't, it's because you suck.
Right, and, or,
Like, that's how
I
that's
mean,
done.
or just they're better or whatever. But, you know, chances are they don't know any more than me necessarily. But they just kind of act like they do. I don't
Well,
know.
for the longest time, men were supposed to go into math, science, all of those, you know, engineering, those, yes, those very technical fields, and women were, I mean, just,
I have a master's of philosophy, so.
but historically, that's kind of how everyone's been relegated. My goddaughter is at the University of Florida studying mathematics because she just loves it. And at all the college tours that we went to, they really wanted her because it's still kind of rare for women to be in those type of fields and be really good at it.
There's a really good article right today
Oh,
came out
yeah?
in Wall Street Journal about what it is about STEM that repels women, and why women do not go for it. It's fascinating, her theory.
And it's, Wall
And I was
Street
gonna
Journal.
say, that's kind of funny because like I studied chemical engineering, and when I was, especially in grad school, like this was the topic at like every single education conference we went to. Although what's also interesting about it too is my little sister just came over with her friends from China, like every single one of them is a STEM major that they're planning to apply for next year. So, I don't know, like I've seen people talking about it for a decade, and it's also like, I do see some cultural changes happen.
I mean, my wife, like, she was a fine arts major in college. She probably should have been a biology major.
Yeah.
Which Kathryn does. And I mean, she strongly considered it, and she's like, still like kind of second guessing herself, you know, like years later, like, you know, should I have gone to veterinary school, you know, whatever. But who knows, like, exactly why she chose the path that she did, because there are so many pressures. But, you know, I think, you know, a lot of it was probably social.
Well, I remember getting the message that you will be stifled and bored in math and science. However good you are, you will find yourself in an uncreative and unfulfilled position, which actually turned out to be not true. That business for me has been, you know, incredibly creative and exciting.
No, I was shifted the same way because I took Java in high school and stuff. I had always been kind of interested, but got definitely told I didn't have the math skills and like wouldn't be able to cut it as a computer sciences major. And so I ended up in graphic design because I liked that kind of like digital web design thing, but didn't think I could code. So I was like, I'll do design and I'll do mock-ups, and I'll hand it off to someone else and I'll code. Yeah, it turns out that if you do that and you go get a job somewhere doing that, they just want you to learn how to code. They'll spend a lot of time guilting you until you learn how to code. And it turns out that I kind of love that, so it worked out. Yeah, I remember the first art director I had learning that I had taken like one HTML class, like in college. He was like, "Don't tell anyone you can code. That's all they'll ever have you do." I was like, "Okay." Well, you don't want to do it.
I'm curious, do you do any type of like services where you counsel people doing this, or you just give talks? Like, what do you do outside of these talks? I guess.
I like, what do I do for a job, or what do I do? Impostor Syndrome related? Or?
Yeah, both of those.
I am a front-end developer and designer now, and that's like, you know, it's my job, my 9 to 5. This is just kind of become something that I'm passionate about, which feels like, again, I feel underqualified saying it. No, I'm just trying. Owning it. But yeah, it just kind of became something I cared about, and I started writing about it, submitted it to another conference, an earlier conference, and they were like, yeah, this is cool, and I've got to do it a couple times now, so it's kind of become my hill to die on.
Because it's really interesting because I'm starting to like develop some courses for grad students because kind of my passion is helping grad students become more successful in each of the things they do. And I know that this comes up not only in development but in a lot of fields where the way I like to say it is your PhD is the first time they allow you to think in school. Because instead of being given a book and being told learn this, you're given a blank piece of paper and said, okay, write a book for me to learn.
Yeah,
And,
that would be horrifying.
and like I said, it's just one, I can see the material being very interesting in that context. And also say, I also believe too that this issue, I think, also prevents a lot of people from showing the work that they have, which especially now with the growth of open source, it could be like a lot of code and like a lot of learning gets missed. Because really, like all of the new frameworks, for example, those are all just cases of people were like custom writing stuff, and eventually someone said, "Oh, I'm going to standardize this finally."
Right.
And it's only when people put the code out there that development can happen. Because they just take those pieces, put them together, and next thing you know, you've got React.js or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, no argument. Working with React now feels very much like it was just cobbled together that way.
Yeah, I'm just starting, so.
I don't want to cut it short, but I also know that we're coming up on that. So I'm going to unplug so at least someone else can plug in and get going. But